Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The other week, when Attorney General Barr sat down with Laura Ingraham, he was asked who poses a greater threat, which country poses a greater threat to our election security, China or Russia? And Attorney General Barr said, China. And he said,
And that's the correct answer.
well, he added, and I'm not just talking about elections, I'm talking about every aspect of our society. And that is a recognition that has been late in coming. Uh, we talked about it earlier this week with our friend Jim Carafano from the Heritage Foundation, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Carafano, and H.R. McMaster in a piece at the Atlantic that has been circulated this week, wrote this: the assumptions from the late 1970s till very recently, the assumptions that America had with respect to its relationship with China were these. This is H.R. McMaster, former National Security Advisor, writing. After being welcomed into the international political economic order, China would play by the rules, open its markets, privatize the economy. As the country became more prosperous, the Chinese government would respect the rights of its people and liberalize politically. And all of those assumptions were about 180 degrees off as we see China becoming an increasingly closed society, an increasingly repressive society, in not dissuaded, as far as anyone can tell, from intellectual piracy and, of course, the cover-up of the outbreak of
Right.
COVID-19.
That's the most egregious thing to date, I think.
And somebody who had an inkling into what China had in store in a specific way through telecom as part of their global strategy to be the world's superpower, displacing America, was Robert Spalding, Brigadier General, United States Air Force Brigadier General, retired, former Senior Director for Strategy at the National Security Council. He was the United States Air Force B-2 stealth pilot. And he's the author of Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. Brigadier General Spalding, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So tell us about 5G, the development of 5G network, and how that implicates our national security, specifically with China, because this was your focus during your most recent stint on the National Security Council.
Yeah, well, it's been, of course, the government has focused on Huawei as a real threat, and Huawei definitely is a threat because it acts as an arm of the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Liberation Army. But, that really doesn't describe the true nature of the threat overall, and really is about data security and data sovereignty. And so today, you may be aware that Google and Apple have designed applications for contact tracing, and that those applications are for use with the current coronavirus to keep track of the spread of the disease. But those apps also give you an indication of how far Silicon Valley has reached into the lives of Americans. Now, this technology and these business practices that Silicon Valley has developed have been adopted by China. And one of the things that they have kind of been stifled, one of the issues that stifled the spread of this domain is really the dominance of Apple and Google in the marketplace. And so they saw 5G as an opportunity to displace Apple and Google, because in 5G, the platform for delivering apps and services and business models is the network itself. And so rather than opening an app on your phone to have an Uber come and pick you up, you would just walk out the door, say Uber, a camera picks up your face, does facial recognition, and then the network sends you a car. That's the idea behind 5G, and they've already begun implementing it in China. They went live in 50 cities last November. And so back in 2017, when I was a defense attaché in Beijing, you could order food on your phone, put it away, and then walk in the restaurant, and a camera in the restaurant would pick up your face, do facial recognition. The server would greet you by name and hand you your food. This is a world that they started building way earlier than this country has really understood what 5G is for, and they want to deploy that everywhere.
So, what are your concerns if China were to control 5G networks here in the United States or around the world?
So imagine the cameras around the city that are needed to power what I just described.
Mm-hmm.
All of that data they would have access to. So in other words, they would have access to full knowledge of everything you do every single day. And so this knowledge can be used to, as we've seen with Facebook, Amazon, and Google, to really sell you more goods through the internet. But it also can be used to both collect intelligence and influence you. In fact, China is deploying something in China called the social credit score. And the social credit score basically monitors your behavior. Do you jaywalk? Do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you have good friends? Do you criticize the government? All of this creates a composite score about your life and the quality of citizen you are according to the Chinese Communist Party. And then as your score goes down, your access to services like public transportation or your kid getting into school or you getting into a job is taken away. This is the kind of influence they would have as Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent, essentially their Facebook, Amazon, and Google equivalents, begins to dominate the global information marketplace.
It seems like there's two issues here, two areas of concern here. One is just about sort of the machine-to-machine communication in a 5G network, the machine learning that goes on, and what it will mean for our civil liberties of a 5G world domestically. And then internationally, particularly vis-a-vis China, the issue is the strength of security of any 5G network we build so that China could not incur and gain control of it and compromise our national security. Is that a fair summary?
That's a fair summary, and part of the challenge was just zeroing in on Huawei, is that Huawei is part of an ecosystem that includes Ericsson and Samsung and Nokia and Qualcomm and Intel and AT&T. They all come together at an industry standard making body called 3GPP that develops the standards for 5G. Now, at that standard making body, China dominates it. In fact, 60% of the security standards for 5G today have been implemented and submitted by China. And so what they're doing is not only dominating what Huawei's network looks like, they're dominating what everybody's 5G network looks like.
And this is where you ran into problems at NSC. You ran into problems because you express. Here's my understanding from reading some of what you've written. You expressed this security concern, and that sort of the government needed to be involved in the build-out of security around our 5G network, and you compared it to Ike and the National Highway System. That's just a digital version of it. And telecom companies don't want any government that they haven't asked for protective purposes, and so you got afoul of telecom companies who didn't want you or the government meddling in the quality of the security of the network, and this is ultimately what led to your ouster.
That's basically it. That's what I was told. Of course, I was never given a reason, to my face, but I was told behind the scenes afterwards that was the reason.
Well, and have you tried to get your job back? How have you tried to fight back?
Oh well, so this is actually a problem that continues, and so it was less about my job and more about taking this message to the American people, because we see now how much power these tech companies in the United States have over our lives, but what we don't realize what's coming is going to be tech companies from China that really have much more power than Facebook, Amazon, and Google as the 5G world gets deployed. For example, Baidu could come in and say, hey, AT&T, we'd like to put cameras on your 5G network in Washington, D.C., in Chicago, and L.A., San Francisco, and New York, and collect all that data. There's nothing precluding them from doing that right now. So the way we think about data security and data sovereignty in a globalized world is really incompatible with preserving our freedoms in that world. And that's what I'm trying to do, is explain that. And then I'm also working in the industry to actually come up with a solution to this problem.
Well, give us an example, make it concrete, and I don't want to prompt a Ridley Scott screenplay here, but in terms of what the potential exposure is if we are willy-nilly about the security even if the private sector is not is concerned about security and takes steps to have as secure a system as they can provide, what the enhancement is of government involvement and what the potential exposure is without it, and were a system to be compromised, what could Chinese communists potentially do to attack our country?
Well, so, I mean, it's really about having the power to influence at the individual level. And so you can create protests through social media. You can reduce a person's image via social media. You can enhance an image via social media, and these tools actually can be used by a foreign government to essentially influence at the individual level. And so conceptually, what you would have is the ability to track somebody through everything they do, and then use that information both to assist their rise or to assist their fall. And essentially what you have to do is and this is why, by the way, the Europeans came up with global data protection regulation. It was meant to protect the privacy of the individual. Unfortunately, because of open data, the way our architecture was created in the beginning of the internet, they're not able to actually implement that. In other words, they can't prevent the companies from using your data in ways that you don't desire. And so you actually have to go back and say, fundamental and foundational to a digital democracy is encryption of your data, where you have the key and nobody else does. And then that access to that data is controlled by you. That is a fundamental component of a digital future, whereby this 5G world doesn't become this giant kind of Orwellian 1984 madness that we're running into.
Yeah, let me take a step back, because you mentioned in one piece from you that I read that you have libertarian tendencies. Let me take a step back and ask you a philosophical question. One of the concerns I have is we're moving to a world of big tech oligarchs and big government, and the elimination of the middle. And here we have the combination of the two, and I can't tell who is wearing a white hat and who's wearing a black hat, or if there are any white hats in this conflict between telecom and, for example, what you wanted to do when you were an advisor on the national security in the National Security Agency. Give us a sense of give me your answer to that as somebody who's been on the inside.
Yeah, so I mean, so one of the things that I don't think is healthy for a democracy is for your government to have access to a DVR of your life. And that's essentially what we've built with the Patriot Act. And so the idea of a secure, encrypted internet for the American people is one where, government doesn't have access to all of these cameras that are tracking you. That's the idea, is really, so as this facial recognition, technology is deployed, rather than that resolving to a name and phone number so that they can track you, it resolves maybe to a random number that then is not available to them. So it's really about preventing the surveillance of anybody, whether it be a large tech company, as you mentioned, whether it be your own government, whether it be a foreign government. It's really about restoring the idea of privacy and data security, for the individual citizen in a democracy. You have to design that into the network.
And so what I'm feeling from reading your work is that both government and telecom are competing for control, for dominion. They're not competing over issues of who ensures privacy or who ensures safety, physical or digital. They're just competing for dominion.
Yes, and that's why totalitarians and authoritarians are actually dominating the space, because they actually like what Silicon Valley has built. We, of course, abhor it, and we can't understand how to deal with it. And that's why you kind of really need to take the power of that, open data and understanding of everything you do in your life away from the tech companies and away from governments as well.
And that's why you had to go. Now it makes a lot of sense. Robert Spalding, he's retired United States Air Force Brigadier General, former Senior Director for Strategy at the National Security Council. He was a Air Force B-2 stealth pilot. He's also the author of Stealth War, How China Took Over While America's Elite Slept. General Spalding, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the great questions.
Yeah, thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
There's only one radio show in Chicago talking about today's biggest stories and telling you what they really mean. That show is this one, Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Is this your situation? Cellular or data services are bad inside your building or vehicle? People notice. People complain. This is Kelly Piles. My company is PC Net Services. We can fix that annoying problem. Resolving this is not as complicated or as expensive as you might think, but it does make a difference. I have worked with the largest cellular providers in the nation. We could improve your cellular and data signal inside your building with all major carriers. No more dropped calls, no more complaints. First responders, government